at Penn State and director of their Sensory Evaluation Center. And the reason he is here today is to help you understand why we like the foods we like and why we don't like some foods. And this particularly is pertinent to parents of children, especially when they're younger and developing these different food preferences. So we're going to get into that conversation today. But before we begin, John, welcome to the show and share with our listeners some of your background story, your research interests, and why you got into sensory and taste preferences as an area of research.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Jill, for having me. I really been looking forward to this. So I have, my favorite thing to do is to sit in a cafe and watch people, right? I find people fascinating and I find why people do what they do to be fascinating. So in some ways, you could say that I'm really a frustrated psychologist. But I started out with my academic training in food science and earned my bachelor's and master's degree, including a master's in sensory science. And then I took a brief detour, as many men of my generation did, and became a dot-commer briefly, trying to become a dot-com millionaire. And that didn't work out, unfortunately. So I had to fall back on my backup career of being an academic. And I
Great.
went and I got my doctorate in human nutrition. Now, I'm not a dietitian and I'm not going to give um, clinical advice, but the lab that I trained in, everyone there was a dietitian,
Yeah.
and so I'm steeped in that culture. So
Mm-hmm.
I do feel comfortable with understanding how dietitians see the world. And then after that, I went and I did um, my doctorates in human nutrition because I was really interested in nutrition from the neck up.
Yeah.
Right. I don't particularly find metabolism interesting myself, hugely important stuff. It's not where my interest lays. I really want to know what happens everything from, when it leaves the farm. I don't know how to grow things. I don't have a green thumb. Farm gate to fork, right? I really want to know why we put the food in our mouth and what drives those food choices. And um, the answer is everything. Everything drives our food choices, right?
Yeah.
It's nature, it's nurture, it's both. And we can talk about some of those various details today.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk. Just sort of give a general overview of sort of the process of developing food preferences, high level, and then we'll get a little bit more specific with your
Sure.
research.
So as I said, it really is a question of both nature and nurture. So you've almost certainly heard um, the phrase from your pediatrician, or if you're a pediatrician, you've given the anticipatory guidance that every food you have to try 15 times.
Yeah.
And as every parent knows, that is a struggle. And I've been there in those trenches, and my kids are older now, but I remember what it was like to try and offer. You're exhausted, you're offering every food over and over and over again. And I'll let you in a little dirty secret. That work was that guidance is based on work by Leanne Birch,
Hmm.
who had done that many years ago. The study was never actually designed to figure out how many exposures you needed, what the minimum was. It was various different experimental conditions, and they found that you could develop a preference with 15 exposures. But it might actually be a little less, it might be a little more, it might vary from kid to kid, it might vary from food to food. So that really is a rough approximation. So you know what? Don't feel like, oh well, I've tried it 14 times. The 15th time will be magical, because that's not necessarily how it's going to work. So a lot of it is parental exposure, parental modeling, what we're offered to eat. Obviously, if a food is not offered to you, you cannot eat it, and you will not learn to like a food that is not offered to you.
Right.
But there's also our biology. We can't escape the fact that evolution really programmed us to like energy dense things. We're born liking sweet. We're born disliking bitter. We actually know this from some very, very, very old research done back in the 1930s, that the
Hmm.
preference for sweetness even predates birth. And the way we know that is if you take saccharin and you inject it into the amniotic fluid, the fetus will actually swallow more. So the fetus will actually drink more amniotic fluid when you sweeten it. Obviously, we wouldn't do that experiment today, but still, it's a really interesting bit of insight to show us that preference for sweetness really is hardwired.
Hmm.
Likewise,